Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. Doreen Herbert lived moments of happiness with her son Paul and her second husband Charles until tragedy struck in 1980. Paul drowned in the home pool. Her ex-husband, Mike Dennis, never forgave Doreen, blaming her and suing her for the accident, a case he ended up losing. Resentment grew in silence until, pregnant at 8 months, Doreen became the target of the most brutal revenge. On Halloween night in 1984, Mike Dennis wore a wolf mask and took a disturbing photo shortly before attacking. Driven by hatred after Paul's death, blaming Doreen and her husband for the accident, he murdered his pregnant ex-wife and the baby she was expecting. In 1988, he was convicted of first-degree and second-degree murder, receiving the death penalty. Today, he remains on death row at California Medical Facility in Vacaville. In July 1951, Mary Reeser was found dead in her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, in circumstances that left investigators perplexed. Her body had been almost completely reduced to ashes, leaving only part of the left foot and spine, while the armchair she was sitting in was also destroyed. The strange fact was that to incinerate a body like that, extremely high temperatures would be required, incompatible with the small area of fire left. A diagram of the apartment showed that only the armchair area was affected, while furniture, bedding, and even nearby papers remained intact. In addition, candles next to the chair had partially melted, but the wick was still upright, which indicated that the heat was concentrated only on Mary's body. These factors reinforced the theory of possible spontaneous human combustion, making her case one of the most mysterious of the 1950s. Just minutes before his death, Dylan Steve was recorded by ATM cameras in Miami, not noticing that an armed man was approaching from behind. The assailant announced the robbery, but Dylan resisted and within seconds was shot several times. Gravely wounded, he fell to the ground and died on the spot before help arrived. The images became a disturbing record of his final moments of life. On May 11, 1985, more than 11,000 fans crowded Valley Parade Stadium in Bradford when a small fire under the bleachers quickly turned into a wall of flames. The fire consumed the dry wooden structure in minutes, trapping entire families without escape routes. Panic was immediate, and the dense smoke caused dozens to faint before reaching the exit. In less than 4 minutes, the entire bleacher was in flames. Many tried to climb fences or jump onto the field, while others were dragged by the desperate crowd. 56 people died, burned, or suffocated, and at least 265 were seriously injured. The fire, caused by a lit cigarette falling into accumulated trash, became one of the most shocking sports disasters in the United Kingdom. Abby Williams and Libby German lived in Delphi, Indiana, and disappeared in February 2017 after going for a walk along the Monon High Bridge Trail. The last photo of Abby was taken by Libby's cell phone less than an hour before they vanished, showing her friend crossing the old wooden bridge. When they did not return, relatives called for searches that led to the discovery of the girls' bodies the next day. On the same cell phone, Libby managed to record a man walking toward them, images that became key evidence in the investigation. Years later, police identified the suspect as Richard Allen, who was convicted of kidnapping and murdering the 2 teenagers, receiving a sentence of 130 years in prison. The case became known as the Delphi Murders and drew international attention for Libby's courage in recording the probable killer. Stephen Griffiths, known as the crossbow cannibal, was caught in 2010 by security cameras in Bradford, England, when capturing a victim who had escaped his apartment. In the footage, he even showed his middle finger to the camera, unaware he was leaving decisive evidence against himself. Armed with a crossbow, he mainly attacked vulnerable women, turning his residence into the scene of brutal crimes. Also called the crossbow killer, Griffiths boasted of his characteristic weapon, the crossbow, which he used to subdue his victims. A criminology student, he claimed he was preparing to be a qualified serial killer. Arrested in 2010, he confessed to killing 3 women. His case drew attention for the contrast between his academic life, where he researched homicides, and his secret life of violent crimes. Jody Huysen-Truitt, a 27-year-old anchor, disappeared on the morning of June 27, 1995, when leaving her apartment in Iowa. Minutes earlier, she had called work saying she was running late. When she did not show up, colleagues alerted police. Jody was involved in notable local reports, which later raised suspicions of stalking. In the parking lot of her building, investigators found her belongings scattered, signs of struggle, and evidence that she had been dragged into another vehicle. Despite intense searches and suspects questioned over the years, she was never found. The case remains open, surrounded by theories of kidnapping and even human trafficking, making her disappearance one of the most disturbing criminal mysteries of the 1990s. Matthew Shepard, a 21-year-old University of Wyoming student, was beaten and tortured in October 1998 after being lured by two men who attacked him for being gay. Tied to a fence in a remote area, he was left exposed to the intense cold for hours. When found, his face was disfigured by the assaults, and the only clean marks were trails left by tears that ran down amid the blood and dirt. Matthew remained tied to the fence for 18 hours until discovered by a cyclist who, from a distance, mistook his body for a scarecrow. Taken to the hospital, he survived for 6 days, but died on October 12, 1998. The crime caused worldwide outrage and resulted in the Matthew Shepard Act of 2009, which expanded the definition of hate crimes in the United States. The attackers were sentenced to life in prison without parole. In February 2003, Kim Dae-han, diagnosed with a stroke and fearing dying alone, boarded a Daegu subway train carrying gasoline. When he set fire inside one of the crowded cars, the flames quickly spread through the underground corridors. Without adequate escape routes and with locked doors, hundreds of passengers were trapped, plunging the station into absolute chaos. The fire consumed 2 trains and left 192 dead and more than 150 injured, all innocent people trapped underground with no chance to escape. Kim managed to flee the scene but was captured soon after. In 2004, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, later reduced to 20 years. He survived the disaster he himself caused, being remembered as responsible for one of South Korea's worst tragedies. On June 10, 1990, during British Airways Flight 5390, pilot Tim Lancaster was violently sucked out of the cockpit when the windshield came loose at more than 16,000 feet of altitude. Held only by the waist, he was left hanging outside the aircraft for almost 20 minutes, exposed to extreme cold and wind force. Inside the cabin, the crew rushed to keep him from being carried away completely. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden held Lancaster's body firmly, while Simon Rogers tied himself to a seat and secured the pilot's ankles, believing he was already dead. Meanwhile, co-pilot Alistair Atchison took control and initiated an emergency descent, struggling to keep the aircraft stable amid chaos. The plane, carrying 81 people, managed to remain under control until approaching Southampton. Against all odds, Tim Lancaster survived despite multiple fractures, frostbite, and deep cuts. He recovered in a Southampton hospital and later posed alongside his crew, who were recognized for their courage and teamwork. Investigations concluded that the incident was caused by the installation of improper bolts on the windshield during aircraft maintenance. On April 30, 2024, in Hainault, London, Marcus Monzo, 37 years old, took to the streets wielding a sword almost 3 feet long. Wearing a yellow coat, he violently attacked 6 people, including 14-year-old teenager Daniel Angerine, who was brutally killed. The attacker had already shown signs of instability and moments earlier had also killed his pet cat at home. Security cameras caught Monzo walking through the streets with the sword in his hands in complete loss of control. For minutes, he spread panic among residents and passers-by until he was subdued by police after a confrontation. The attack left 5 injured and 1 dead, shocking the United Kingdom for its unexpected brutality. Today, Monzo faces charges of murder and multiple attempted murders. The Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in Nantes, France, formed by Xavier, his wife Agnès, and 4 children. In April 2011, all of them mysteriously disappeared until police discovered their bodies buried under the terrace of the house, wrapped in sheets, placed in bags, and covered with quicklime. The investigation revealed that Xavier had bought shovels, bags, and lime weeks earlier, and that the victims were killed while they slept, along with the family's 2 dogs. Right after the crime, Xavier was tracked traveling through southern France, staying in hotels and always paying in cash. Security cameras recorded his last steps in Roquebrune-sur-Argent, where he abandoned his car near a trail. Since then, he has never been seen again. Wanted internationally, he became the protagonist of one of Europe's most mysterious and talked about criminal cases. Amy Pitson was known for struggling with depression crises, but to many, she seemed like a caring mother dedicated to her son, Timothy Pitson. On May 11, 2011, she went to the school in Aurora, Illinois, and took the boy out of class, saying she had a family emergency. From that moment, she began a trip with Timothy that passed through different places, while relatives believed it was just an unexpected outing. Security cameras recorded Amy and Timothy together in hotels and establishments during those days, including images known as the last in which the boy appears with his mother. They were seen at water parks and tourist attractions with no apparent problems. However, on May 13th, Amy was seen entering a store alone in Illinois without Timothy at her side, raising suspicions about the boy's whereabouts. That night, Amy stayed alone in a hotel in Rockford. The next day, she was found dead in the room, victim of an intentional act. Next to her was a letter stating that Timothy was safe, but that you will never find him. Since then, Timothy Pitson's disappearance remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the United States, with no definitive clues about where the boy was taken. Joaquin Sperani, 14 years old, lived in La Boule, Cordoba, Argentina, where he was known for his passion for soccer, technology, and drawing. He studied at the Bernardino Rivadavia Institute and often rode his bike around the city. On June 29, 2023, he left home saying he was meeting his best friend. When several hours passed and he had not returned, the family began searching for him and called the police. Cameras recorded Joaquin riding his bike to an abandoned house where he left it before walking in with his friend. Another image shows the two walking side by side moments before entering. It was there that the friend attacked him with dozens of blows, later revealing that he had committed the crime out of anger and personal conflicts. Since he was 14 years old, the perpetrator was not arrested and was placed in custody at a juvenile center. The Hawker Hunter T-7 jet was participating in the Shoreham Air Show on August 22, 2015, when it began a loop maneuver in front of thousands of spectators. As it came out of the curve, it lost altitude and headed toward the A27 highway, flying too low and outside the event's safety area. The jet could not regain enough altitude, approaching dangerously close to one of the region's busiest roads. The impact on the highway resulted in a huge explosion that hit moving vehicles and people nearby. 11 people lost their lives, most of them drivers passing by, while 16 others were injured. The pilot survived, but the disaster turned the area into a scene of destruction. The accident was marked as the deadliest in UK air shows since Farnborough in 1952. Sharon Tate, Hollywood actress and wife of director Roman Polanski, was 8.5 months pregnant when she was photographed in Los Angeles in August 1969. These images, taken a day before her death, show her final recorded moments of pregnancy. At 26 years old, Sharon was a rising star and was preparing for the birth of her first child while living in a house on Cielo Drive that would soon become the scene of a tragedy. On the night of August 8 to 9, 1969, followers of Charles Manson's cult invaded the residence and murdered Sharon Tate along with 4 other people, stabbing her brutally. After the massacre, they wrote the word "pig" with blood on the house walls. Days later, Roman Polanski was photographed at the entrance of the residence, where the crime mark was still visible. The case shocked the world and became part of U.S. criminal history. Heather Saul lived in Charleston, West Virginia, when a man entered her home armed and tried to assault her sexually. During the struggle, she managed to take the pistol from his hands and fired, killing him on the spot. Later, authorities identified the attacker as Neil Falls, and the investigation revealed that he might have been linked to crimes much more serious than an isolated attempted attack. In Neil Falls' car, police found a terrifying arsenal: knives, handcuffs, hatchets, garbage bags, a shovel, bleach, and a bulletproof vest. This kit raised strong suspicions that he acted as a serial killer and was hunting for new victims. Investigators linked his profile to disappearances of women in different states, and Heather was recognized as the person who managed to prevent other crimes from happening. Lauren Bunner, 20 years old, and his ex-girlfriend Jolie Callan, 18, still appeared together in photos posted on Instagram in August 2015, where they seemed to maintain a close relationship even after the breakup. Lauren invited Jolie for a hike in the Cheaha Mountains in Alabama, one of the state's highest points, and a place they often visited together. During the walk, he took photos of her, giving the impression of a normal day. The last known photos of Jolie show the young woman contemplating the view and holding her dog on the edge of a cliff, a scene that looked peaceful but would become the place of her death. Lauren pulled out a .22 caliber revolver and shot her twice before pushing her body to its fatal fall. Later, police confirmed that those images, taken shortly before the crime, were the final records of her life, unaware of her ex-boyfriend's intentions. After the murder, Bunner returned to the car and called 911, confessing the crime in detail and waiting for the police by the roadside. At trial in November 2015, he claimed the two had made a death pact, an allegation never proven. Lauren Bunner was sentenced to 52 years in prison. The case gained national attention for the coldness with which he photographed Jolie minutes before killing her. Chung Ben-hwa, only 15 years old, was captured by Japanese soldiers in April 1938 in Anhui Province, China. Tied up and surrounded, she refused to beg for her life, keeping her arms crossed before the squad that humiliated her and awaited her execution. The scene showed the teenager aware of her tragic fate, turning her final moments into a cruel portrait of the brutality of war. Executed without mercy, Chung Ben-hwa was remembered not only as a martyr, but as a victim of a brutal death that exposed the tragedy of the Japanese occupation. Her image, repeated in murals and books, immortalized the moment when a young woman was sacrificed without hesitation. The monument in her honor is still visited today, where flowers remember the teenager who faced a tragic end. Skylar Neese, 16 years old, lived in Morgantown, West Virginia, and was very close to her friends Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy. The three often appeared together in photos, showing the image of an ordinary teenage friendship. However, Skylar had been showing signs of distrust, as in her last Twitter post on July 5, 2012, where she made it clear she did not fully trust the people closest to her. On the night of July 6, 2012, security cameras recorded Skylar leaving her apartment and getting into a gray car near a dumpster. She believed she was going out with her friends for a ride, but she did not know she was being lured into a trap. Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy took her to a secluded area on the Pennsylvania border, where they brutally attacked her with knives they had hidden beforehand. Skylar was stabbed more than 50 times and left in a wooded area, where her body would only be found months later. In 2013, Rachel confessed to the crime and revealed Sheila's involvement, claiming that the two no longer wanted to be Skylar's friends. Both were convicted, Rachel to 30 years and Sheila to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The case was marked by the coldness and betrayal of two friends against someone who trusted them. Rui Pedro, 11 years old, disappeared on March 4, 1998, in Lusada, Portugal. That day, he rode his bike to his mother's workplace to ask for permission to go out with Afonso Diaz, a 22-year-old friend, but his request was denied. Shortly after, Rui vanished without a trace. Witnesses said they saw him inside Afonso's car that afternoon, making him the main suspect in the disappearance, a version reinforced years later during the trial. A month after the disappearance, in April 1998, a family took photos in Disneyland Paris, and in the background appeared the image of a boy very similar to Rui Pedro, sitting next to a man in a red coat. Police analyzed the photo but could not confirm the identity of either the boy or the man. Since then, Rui Pedro has never been seen again, and Afonso Diaz was sentenced to 3 years in prison for kidnapping, keeping the case as one of Portugal's greatest mysteries. On Christmas morning of 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, the last photos of JonBenet Ramsey, 6 years old, were taken just hours before she was found dead. Daughter of John and Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet was known for competing in child beauty pageants, winning several titles. The disappearance began with a ransom note found in her home asking for exactly $118,000, the same amount as her father's annual bonus. A few hours after the ransom note, John Ramsey found his daughter's body in a wine cellar in the basement of the house. JonBenet showed signs of strangulation, head trauma, and had a rope tied around her neck. The scene contained contradictory evidence, dividing investigators between the hypothesis of an invasion and the involvement of the family itself. Decades later, the case remains unsolved. The Martin family, composed of the parents and 3 daughters under 16, disappeared in 1958 after leaving Portland for the Oregon countryside. With no trace left, the case puzzled investigators for decades. Witnesses reported seeing the family's white car on icy roads near the mountains, but no concrete clues were ever found, making the disappearance one of the most enigmatic of the time. Decades later, divers located the Martin family's car submerged in Cascade locks. Inside the vehicle, along with shoes and personal objects, human remains were found that linked the mystery to the bottom of the Columbia River. The conditions indicated that the car had fallen off the icy road, tragically ending the family's fate. The case, now partially solved, remains surrounded by mystery regarding the exact circumstances. Jared Michael Negrete, 12 years old, disappeared on July 19, 1991, during a Boy Scout excursion on Mount San Gorgonio in California. He separated from the group during the climb and was never seen again, despite searches that mobilized hundreds of people. The area was considered treacherous, with steep trails, dense fog, and easy disorientation, which made the disappearance even more mysterious. The last clue found was photos taken by his camera, along with some belongings scattered on the mountain, but no trace of the boy was located. The searches extended for days without results until Jared was presumed dead. Months later, his family held a memorial in his honor, remembering him as a lively young scout. What happened on the slopes of San Gorgonio remains unanswered. This was the last photo of Naga Enthran Dharmalingam, taken shortly before his execution in Singapore. Arrested in 2009 for trying to enter the country with a small amount of heroin tied to his body, he had an IQ of 69, considered an intellectual disability level, which raised doubts about his true ability to understand his actions. His defense claimed that he had been manipulated by traffickers. Despite his mother Panchalai's pleas and international campaigns led by human rights groups, all appeals were denied. Activists highlighted that his execution violated international treaties by punishing a person with intellectual disability. In April 2022, Naga Enthran was hanged, sparking protests in several countries and leaving a strong mark on the debate about the death penalty in Singapore. Felicity Loveday, 83 years old, was a respected figure of co-Freemasonry in Southport, remembered for her spiritual dedication. In her final years, she lived under the care of her son, Adrian Meneveau, who accompanied her daily. Shortly before the disappearance, Adrian took strange actions. He left bank passwords with his sister, paid bills in advance, and organized his finances, as if planning a departure with no return. Andrew Macaulay, an Australian adventurer, set out in January 2007 to cross the Tasman Sea alone in a kayak, a route of more than 1,000 miles between Australia and New Zealand. For almost a month, he faced extreme cold, giant waves, and constant storms, recording in photos and videos the intensity of the journey. Determined, he kept paddling toward New Zealand, becoming news for the audacity of his crossing. On February 9th, just 30 miles from the coast of New Zealand, Andrew sent a distress message saying that his kayak was sinking. Soon after, the vessel was found adrift without him on board. A waterproof camera recovered revealed a video recorded for his wife Vicky and their son, where he left a farewell message. Despite intense searches, his body was never found, and that photo became the final record of his journey. Helena Hutchins, 42-year-old cinematographer, was working on the set of The Western Rust when tragedy struck in October 2021. The rehearsal was taking place inside the church set when the actor received a firearm he believed was unloaded. Helena Hutchins is shown from behind wearing a white cap facing Baldwin moments before the shot. Moments later, the shot hit Hutchins in the chest and director Joel Souza in the shoulder. The weapon, mistakenly loaded with live ammunition, turned the filming into a fatal scene. Hutchins did not survive her injuries. Baldwin was seen in shock and tears outside. Investigations pointed to serious failures in safety and weapons handling on the set. Anita Rose, 57 years old, was seen in Suffolk, United Kingdom, during her daily routine of walking her dog. Shortly after, she was brutally attacked and found with severe head injuries consistent with high-speed impacts. The crime shocked the local community for its unexpected violence, leaving the family devastated and triggering an intense police manhunt for the attacker. Her belongings were found near a low vegetation area close to the Brantham railway line, where an improvised camp was also hidden. There lived Roy Barclay, a fugitive who had been on the run for 2 years. After being located, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years for the brutal murder of Anita Rose, a crime that revealed his life marked by isolation and violence. In the so-called Valley of Death in Forden, Poland, teachers were photographed moments before being executed by German forces. These victims were part of a systematic campaign by the Nazi occupation to eliminate the Polish intellectual elite in an attempt to weaken resistance and destroy national identity. Many were taken to the site under false promises of interrogation, only to be executed in mass shootings. Dale Kerstetter, a night watchman at a Corning glass factory in Pennsylvania, disappeared in September 1987. Security cameras recorded him alongside a masked man carrying a large bag while leaving the factory. That same shift, the theft of platinum valued at thousands of dollars was detected. Since then, there has never been a sign of Kerstetter, leaving only the doubt of whether he was kidnapped or an accomplice. Amy Lynn Bradley, 23 years old, disappeared in March 1998 during a cruise on the Rhapsody of the Seas while traveling with her family. Photographs show the young woman enjoying the trip normally, with no signs of concern. However, witnesses reported that crew members had invited Amy to go out in previous ports, raising suspicions of harassment and possible recruitment still on board. The last images show Amy dancing in the ship's lounge hours before she disappeared. Later, passengers claimed to have seen a woman resembling her on Caribbean islands, including in a brothel. Reports of an identical tattoo increased suspicions of human trafficking. Despite intense searches and international investigations, her whereabouts were never confirmed, making the case a mystery to this day. Woo In-hee, one of the best-known actresses in North Korea, was accused in 1989 of having inappropriate relationships with high-ranking officials of the regime. Tried for immoral conduct, she was sentenced to death and publicly executed in Pyongyang. The scene of her last film became the final recorded image of her career, while the government tried to erase her existence, removing her name and works from North Korean history. The last photo of Janet Johnson was taken during the 1973 American expedition to Aconcagua, when she and John Cooper disappeared. Both were part of a group of 8 climbers ascending the Polish glacier. Suffering from altitude effects, they fell behind and did not return to camp. The searches immediately after the disappearance were unsuccessful, and their bodies would only be found years later, preserved by the ice. Autopsies pointed to brain injuries in both, along with additional wounds. Cooper had an abdominal puncture that reached the spine, and Johnson had facial trauma with a rock placed over her face. These findings raised hypotheses that the deaths might not have been caused only by the mountain environment. The rediscovery of their belongings in 2020 brought new evidence, but the case remains without a definitive explanation. This photo was taken in 1895 by Orrin Jeffries, a speleologist and amateur photographer, while exploring an unmapped part of the Grand Caverns in Virginia. During an experiment with long exposures in his handmade camera, he heard sounds coming from the darkness and, frightened, triggered a magnesium flash. In the development, 2 figures with glowing eyes appeared, creating one of the most enigmatic records of the 19th century. Timothy Treadwell, known as the Bear Man, spent 13 summers among grizzly bears in Katmai National Park in Alaska, believing he was in harmony with them. In 2003, alongside his girlfriend Amy Huguenard, he was brutally attacked and killed by a bear during the end of the season, when the animals become more aggressive. Their remains were found near the predator, and a camera recorded in audio the screams of both.